Welcome, fellow wine lovers. This is the Wine Ghosts podcast. I'm Mate Bosch, a certified sommelier and seeker of hidden stories behind the most mysterious drink in history. For more information or direct contact, please look for the Wine Ghosts on Instagram and Facebook. But now, please grab a glass, get comfortable, and listen to how the day's ghosts get out of the bottle. Another great wine wizard from the Wachau region of Austria, Josef Fischer. The winery that bears the same name as my dear guest is located in Roschetz, on the right bank of the river Danube. As a true Wachau winery, they bring out the best expression of Riesling and Grüner Veltliner on their world-class single vineyard sites on Federspiel and Smaragd levels. Joe explained the Wachau terroir in great detail by specifying rock and soil types and justified why he's planting more Riesling nowadays. You can learn about the mystery of Quellagneis, the legend of the Dürstein Castle, and how the DOC designation changes labels in Wachau. Joe has great knowledge about his homeland and, after tasting 4 of his wines, for sure great affinity to winemaking. You can also watch my tasting video on Instagram and YouTube and watch the last part, almost 50 minutes of this conversation on the Wine Ghosts YouTube channel. But now, please grab a glass and listen to Joe. Okay, so hi Joe, thank you for taking the invitation. How are you today, sir?
Hello. I'm good, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, please, thanks for taking the time. So how are you today, sir, and where are you now exactly? And what's your daily task?
Yeah, I'm in Rossatz right now, which is a little village in the Wachau Valley, and it's situated on the right river bank of the Danube, which is compared now to the left hand riverbank of the Wachau Valley a little bit more in the advantage that in terms of climate change, because it's a little cooler region, and yeah, we love to produce wines out from here.
Sure, and also in terms of terrain, it's the left bank is also more terraced, right?
Yes, correct. The left bank is more terraced, yeah.
So how does it differ in terms of the response to the climate change?
You mean the terraces?
Yeah. Why is it better to have the vineyards on the right bank in terms of climate change?
I wouldn't say that the terraces are getting worse now, but it's a more microclimate influence in the terraces, and in terms of like if you have a very hot vintage or like a hot season, very dry and hot season, the terraces are more or less a little disadvantage because it's even hotter there. Mm-hmm. But of course, it's an advantage in a very cool season, in a very cool vintage, because all the terraces, the stone walls, they save the heat from the sun, yeah, and give it back to the vines during the night. So if you have a very cold vintage and a very humid, wet vintage, it's an advantage. But we see like the hotter seasons are becoming more and more.
Okay.
Before, if you see like if you produce a Grüner Veltliner, they lose actually a lot of acid, and this is becoming more and more a problem with Grüner Veltliner at the time, because the people like to drink a little bit more fresher wines, a little bit more medium-bodied, lower alcoholic wines, and sometimes this can be, of course, a disadvantage with the very hot seasons.
Okay, just we jumped right in the middle of the conversation of the terroir description, but it's I think it's good if you could just maybe paint a picture about this region, because maybe some of the listeners have never been to Wachau, but I think it's a very beautiful region, and maybe if you just can paint a picture where it is exactly, and how the climatic differences can be displayed in this little area.
Yeah, of course. So the Wachau Valley itself is actually one of the most coolest wine regions in Austria. And it's about 70 kilometers west from Vienna. which makes it about an hour's drive from Vienna. So we have also lots of wine tourists here coming during the season, because they fly to Vienna, and then it's just an hour's drive from the airport, more or less. And so if you see Vienna, then you go all the long Danube highway up to us, to the Wachau Valley, and you cross about 4 to 5 different wine regions, which is like the Wagram, Kremstal, Kamptal, Treisental. You all cross them until you come to us. So we are the most western part of Lower Austria itself, and that makes it also we start harvesting very late. So normally, like in the past, we started harvesting in about in the first week of October, and because of climate change, it became more and more the second or third week of September, and lots of other wine regions are like in the middle of harvest already when we start. So that makes it a little advantage in terms of quality and of freshness, because the later you harvest, the cooler the nights become. So we are in the situation that we normally don't have to cool our grapes. So because when you harvest in October, it's already cold, and so we don't have to do any of this. So we have the big advantage that we get a lot of grapes coming in a very cool temperature. And so then when you are in the Wachau Valley, we have 2 river banks, the left one and the right one, because the whole Danube is coming from Germany, from the Schwarzwald, which is in Bayern. What is the English name for Bayern? It's Bavarian, sorry. So it comes from Bavarian, and then it crosses the border to Austria. Then it crosses the Inn, and so from that position on, which is like in Tyrol, the Danube becomes very big. I think it becomes even the second biggest river in whole Europe, and this river, of course, influences the whole region a lot, because we have normally much cooler nights, even in the summer. So the more and more you go to the eastern border of to Hungary, the weather becomes warmer, also during the night. So if you see, like if you picture the Wachau Valley, we have actually two airstreams coming into the valley. The first airstream is the left, or like the Atlantic airstream, which brings us lots of cold winds and cold rain, more or less. And then you have the eastern side of the river, which is actually coming from Vienna, from the Hungarian part, and this is the Pannonian climate influence. And the Pannonian climate influence brings warm airstreams into the valley. So, and in terms of rain, for instance, if it's coming if the rain is coming from the eastern side, we are normally very relaxed, because these rains are cold, more or less, and it's actually perfect in terms of fungus, because there's no fungus coming in if there's cold rain, because the temperature is too cold. But if rain is coming from the eastern part, from the Hungarian part, that's normally warm airstreams. So that even means that that also means that the rain is warmer. And in terms of that, we have sometimes more problems with hail, especially during the summer season. This is a problem, more or less, of course, and even in terms of fungus, that then you have more the problem with downy and powdery mildew. But luckily, most of the airstreams are coming from the western part, from the Atlantic Ocean, and that makes it itself a very cool region.
And also the hail is mostly coming from the east, right?
All the time, correct. If we get hail, it's coming from the eastern side, because there's actually a hot part and the cold part mixing together, and that produces hail, and then the rail is coming down. But luckily, especially in our regions, we don't have that problems with hail, because we have, as I said, the Atlantic influence from the western part, and that actually comes together in the Wachau Valley, and that brings hot summer days, but cold nights, more or less. Do you understand?
And that's also very good for white wine production, right? Because then they can retain the acidity, but also get some ripeness from the sun.
Yeah, correct. That's actually the point. Correct. So I think the percentage of red wine production is about 2 or 3%. So that's very, very small percentage. And these wines are normally get drunk at the local restaurants. So.
And which grape varieties?
Sorry?
Which grape varieties in terms of reds?
Mostly Zweigelt. Zweigelt. There's no Blaufränkisch production, nothing, but mostly it's Zweigelt. But it's not so special to say that. So it's the wines are getting okay, but they won't become famous, to be honest. Yeah. So because the valley itself is so focusing on the whites, especially of course Grüner, Veltliner and Riesling. But there's also some other varieties, which is like Chardonnay or Pinot Blanc or a little bit of Muscatella. So all these varieties are also like next hand. So the main varieties are Grüner and Riesling.
So, and maybe if we could just talk about the two banks of the Wachau. So what is the difference maybe in terms of the left bank and right bank, also in terms of wine quality and also in terms of viticulture, and how would you maybe distinguish a wine in a blind tasting if you could?
Yeah, so the left riverside is the bigger one. So which makes out about 60 or 66%, so about 2/3 of the whole production is coming from the left side. And where we stay, the right one is about 30 or 35%, something like that. And so, of course, the left one is the little bit more famous ones, because all the big wineries are coming from the left side, which is like, FX Bichler, Hitzberger, Knoll, all these well-known producers. And why there's no especially famous producer on the right riverside is what I think, that after the wine crisis in 1985, which of course infected the whole wine country, even the Wachau wines. After that, there was like a few big wineries like Jammek, Hicksberger, Knoll, all these ones who took the situation and produced very good wines in terms of quality. So they put out they left all the quantity wines and then just stick to high quality wines. And after that, they become actually quite famous in Austria, because Austria was all at this time only known because of a lot of wine, a lot of cheap wine, a lot of sweet wine, all of that, and they changed it completely. And so this is why the left riverside is a little bit more famous than the right one. But about 5 years ago, like me or like my friend Georg Frischengruber and a few other producers, we took the situation that climate changing is coming more and more effective. And so because of our vineyard sites, which are, some of them are north facing, and in the past, or like when we have been to the wine school and all this stuff, they told us north facing vineyards are not producing any quality grapes, more or less. And so, but because of the climate change, it's changing now. No, you understand? So that the people are looking more for fresher wines, for a little lower alcoholic wines, and that's becoming now a big advantage, to be honest. And we actually take the chance, and yeah, we are doing good with that.
So in terms of wine quality, maybe if you could maybe explain the left bank and the right bank, also maybe in terms of soil differences and also maybe climatic differences, not just exposure. So how would you, because if you are in a blind tasting, it's could be maybe a decisive note whether the Wachauer wine comes from the left bank or the right bank.
That is a good question. So in terms of soil, actually, there's not a big difference, and the reason why that is that the Danube River, as it flows today, had other directions. So like 1,000 years ago, or like even more, that the Danube didn't switch the two river banks, so it actually it flew somewhere else, and so that means that the soils are actually more or like pretty comparative to the left one side. So that means, or like if you see Rossatz is a little town like about 10 kilometers from Krems, 10 kilometers west from Krems, and we have two different soil parts from Rossatz. So if you go to the eastern parts of our vineyards from Rossatz, we have the single vineyards which are called the Steiger and Frauenweingärten, and they have more Löss and more Danube gravel part, so that makes these wines a little bit more mighty, a little bit more full-bodied, and a little bit more tropical. And the western part of our vineyards, everything which is west from Rossatz, these vineyards are called Kreuzberg, Kirnberg, and Zanz. And these ones are more the mineralic driven wines. So on these side we have more primary rock. So the primary rock what we have is called gneiss, and these gneiss has got three different parts of it. They are called amphibolite, Köhler gneiss, which is coming from the Czech Czech Republic side, and the Paragneiss, which is little bit more volcanic. And all these categories are also situated on the left-hand riverside, and they also have some parts mixed with Löss and mixed with gravel. I think it's more, or you see it, especially at the Wachau Valley, you need to see it a little bit more from the not from the bank side, but from the altitude side. So we have like Rossatz, the village itself, is about 250 meters above sea level, and everything which is near the Danube, of course, it's more influenced by the Danube, like with gravel, with sandy soils, Löss soils, and loamy soils. And if you go more up and up and up, you get more the primary rock influence, which is, as I said, a little bit more the mineralic driven wines. And these wines compared are of course very different. So as I mentioned before, all the Löss, so the deeper grounded soils, these wines become a little bit more mighty and full-bodied, and the mineralic driven wines, they are a little bit more lean, a little bit more straightforward, with a little bit more acid, and a little bit more mineralic, of course. And what we see on customer side is that it's more or less 50-50 what the customer prefers itself. and in comparison to wines produced from the left-hand riverside and the right-hand riverside, I think it's not that easy actually. I would go a little bit more to compare the eastern part of the whole Wachau Valley and the western part of the whole Wachau Valley, and would quit the question about left-hand and right-hand riverside. So actually the eastern part of the Wachau Valley is where the villages around the Leuben and Dürnstein are, and the western part is where like Arnsdorf and Spitz is. And these wines are all a little bit more different than if you say like this one is from a left-hand riverside and this one is from a right-hand riverside.
Mm. And also in terms of picking, right? Because it's like 40 kilometers, right? The whole valley. And also it's like, it could be weeks of differences in terms of picking, right? Between these plots.
Correct. So like if you see the winemakers from Dürnstein and from Leuben, they probably start picking about 2 to 3 weeks later than the people from Spitz. And us, so the winery Fischer and Rossatz, we normally are quite in the middle. So like we about, I would say we pick about 10 days later than the people from Dürnstein do, and about 1 week or 10 to 14 days earlier than the people from Spitz do.
And also maybe the exposure could be maybe a decisive note, right? Because on the left-hand side, I imagine more southern exposure is common, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the left-hand riverside is mostly south facing, and our vineyards are a little bit more. It depends. Some of our vineyards are completely facing to east. Yeah. Some of them are completely facing to west, and some of them are facing north. So that's quite different. And that reason why is that especially where the village of Rossatz is, the Danube makes a curve, a very big curve. It's about more than 90 degrees. And this is why we have eastern facing vineyards, western facing vineyards, and north facing vineyards.
And also Kreuzberg is, I think, when I looked it up, it's very interesting because it's like a semicircle, right? Kind of a vineyard.
Yeah, that's the point.
It could be east and west.
Kreuzberg itself, correct, is facing eastern, is facing west, and it's facing north. So it's like a three part, because this is especially where the curve from the Danube is. And in this vineyard, we have also very big influence, or like actually the whole valley around Rossatz is influenced by that. It's called the Black Forest, or like we have behind our village, there's the Black Forest. And this one brings very cold air streams during the night. And that's actually very good for the whites, because then they save the acid. Yeah.
Oh, great. And in terms of soil, because you mentioned a lot of soil, and I think it's a very distinctive note to Wachau whites that they have a mineral taste. And I also tasted a lot of Wachau wines, and also your wines. They have this character like little rocks just popping in your mouth and just banging the walls of your mouth. And really like a mineralic taste, but not salty, but inorganic and like really mineralic taste. So do you think I think it's more like a sensation. So we know that already that you cannot really measure the inorganic elements in wine, because then they would be toxic probably. So why do you think this sensation is coming from the Wachau wines? Or how does it go to wines?
I think that the point is that a lot of our vineyards, they struggle to get water from the soil. So especially the mineralic ones, the wines which stands on the primary rock soils, they really sometimes struggle to get the water out from the soil. So they need to create very deep roots, to get as much water out of the soil what they can, and that makes the wines very concentrated, but in terms of mostly acid and flavor and less fruit, actually. You know what I mean? Because the main goal from the wine is actually not to produce a wine. We produce the wine, but the main goal from a wine itself is to protect its seeds. And what they do is if they struggle to get the water out from the soil, they even more try to protect the seeds, because they think that they're probably not gonna survive the season, more or less. And what they do then is that they produce other flavors in the berry itself. So they get less tropical flavors, the berries, but more phenolics and actually acid-driven flavors, more or less, which goes a little bit more the citrus or the citric direction, and the less creamy or the less very fruity note. You know what I mean? I think that's the main reason why we get this special taste.
And maybe just to draw some general conclusions, because you have a lot of soil types, and I know that Wachau winemakers place a huge emphasis on the different bedrock types. So if you could just draw some general conclusions, so for example, Quellernais, what it gives to the wine, and like other primary rock types. So how would you decide, maybe in terms of grape quality, which grape variety to plant on these different kind of soils?
Of course, yeah. What we do is that on the more deeper grounded soils, yeah, which is more like the little the smaller altitude sites, we plant more Grüner Veltliner, because Grüner Veltliner itself is just more struggling with water, because the grapes are normally bigger, the crop is normally a little bigger, and this variety just cannot handle water stress as good as Riesling, probably. And this is why, because Riesling is handling a dry season much better than Grüner, we plant the Rieslings on the higher altitude sides and the more primary rock sides. And because of a lot of vineyards are not irrigated, we actually need to do this, because otherwise, in a very high altitude site, when you plant Grüner Veltliner there, you have probably a big loss because of all the vines who just don't survive the season, and a lot of these wines they do produce a lot of sugar in the berries later on, during the harvest during the harvest time, because they just try to survive. And what they do is produce sugar to protect the seed, as I mentioned before. And this is actually a reason why the Riesling is a little bit more planted on the higher altitude side and the Grüner on the smaller altitude side. Correct. And then we have also the Federspiel and the Smaragd category. What we do here is, normally we do a pre-selection for the Federspiel category, and then we just let the Smaragd wines hanging a little longer on the wine, and later on we pick for the Smaragd quality.
And what does it mean that a little longer? So usually, how big is the difference in terms of picking time?
Of course, it depends on the season, but in a normal season, whatever normal is, but in a normal harvest, we start picking the Grüner Veltliner grapes for the Federspiel category in about end of September or the first days in October. Yeah. Then normally we start harvesting Riesling for the Federspiel category, which makes it about normally between the first week of October and the second week. Then later on we pick the Grüners for the Smaragds and the Riesling for the Smaragds. And this time is about, or I would say, 2 to 3 weeks. Of course, depending on the vintage, but in general, it's about 2 to 3 weeks laying on the wine for the Smaragd category.
And you don't produce Steinfeder?
We don't do, correct. In my winery, we don't produce any Steinfeder, correct.
And why is that?
It's a good question. The problem, or like, because I'm focusing more on the more powerful wines, more probably. And Steinfeder stands for more lighter wines, for easy drinking wines with probably a little less complexity. And I prefer more complexity in the wines, and this is the reason why we don't produce any Steinfeder. But it's absolutely not a reason for other wineries not to produce any Steinfeders, because it's very cool to drink. On a very hot summer day, good chilled bottle of Steinfeder is you do nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, it's a typical terrace or pool wine, right?
Yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah. And maybe just go back to the soil. If you could just categorize maybe the soil types, because you said it's more deeper kind of soil or maybe more rocky. But if you find some amphibolite, which is this really dense green colored type of rock, right? So if you could just find some amphibolite or Kvöllagneis or either sedimentary soil. So how would you categorize or cluster these kind of rock types or bedrock types?
We actually have a map, more or less from the past, and there were people actually, more or less digging holes in the vineyards, and they analyzed all the rocks, the different rocks, and they have all these rocks have different contents of mineral, like iron or nitrogen or calcium. All these components, all these partners, and so we know it actually from the past, more or less. Of course, there's sometimes a mixture of all these rocks, but more or less we actually know in which vineyard size we have which rocks. You also see it actually on the color. So the amphibolite, as you mentioned before, is that very greenish dark color, and it actually comes from the Black Forest, which is just behind it, more or less. And then we have the Kvöllagneis, which is more coming from the Czech Republic inside. This is why it is called Kvöl, because Kvöl is a little village in the Waldviertel, which is about an hour's drive from our village. And this rock is lighter in color, which is a more the grayish white side, actually, to be honest. And the Paragneis is actually a mixture of these two partners. It's not as dark as the amphibolite, but darker than the Kvöllagneis.
Is it also a defining factor when you plant different varieties or when you harvest different varieties from this kind of soil? So maybe Kvöllagneis is better for Grüner Veltliner or
not specifically. What we do is normally we look at the vineyard before planting, and then we see how much soil itself is or like how big the percentage of soil and how big the percentage of rock is. And I would say the more meager the soil is, that means the more rocky it is, the more Riesling planting would make sense. You know what I mean? So it's not that when we have like a whole vineyard just with amphibolite, then okay, no, we just plant Riesling and no Grüner Veltliner, or the other way. So it's also very depending on it's more on the altitude side. To be honest, that means the higher you are, of course, you have less soil, or less soil in terms of sand, loam, and
less humus.
and humus, of course, definitely, yeah. And that makes it just easier for Riesling. Riesling also is a little bit more effective, or like Riesling itself has got more problems with fungus, and especially botrytis. And the more wetter a season is, the more botrytis, of course, you get. And so if there's less water in the soil, you have, or like the vines that just they take less water into the berries, and then they don't burst as easily as in a very deep soil, because they have more power, more full body, and then the berries, it can be a problem that the berries just become too compact, and then they start to burst. And that is not what a winemaker likes to get. Sure. You get stress, and
Okay, and maybe if you could just talk a little bit about your winemaking method, because you already mentioned botrytis. I don't know if because for some winemakers it could be desirable, or some wines also in the Smaragd quality could maybe benefit from, for example, a light botrytis note, right?
Yes and no. Also, in this point, you need to see that the vintage itself. Actually, if you have a very hot vintage, normally you have a lot of sugar already in the berries. And what you don't want to have is that you get even more sugar because of the botrytis. Because what the botrytis fungus does is it infects the berry, and it actually sucks all the water out from the berry. And what you get then is you get a lot of raisins, actually, and they become, of course, much sweeter than a normal berry, because all the water gets out because of the fungus. And that means if you have a very hot season, very hot vintage, a very early vintage, which is now actually because of the climate change becoming more and more, you don't want to have that, because then you get just wines with lots of alcohol, or even sweet wines. And so my method is actually to produce wines with as less botrytis infections as possible. Sometimes we actually allow it, especially for the Smaragd wines, just to get a little bit more creaminess into the wines. But we talk about 5 to 10%, not even more. And my winemaking methods are very easy explained. So what we do is that we just crush the berries. The grapes. We don't de-stem. Then we keep it in the press for about 4 to 5 hours, just to get a little bit more phenolics out of the skins. Then when we press it very slowly, that we get a little bit more concentration out of the skins again, because our skin contact is not that big, actually. And then we what's the name? Then we ferment spontaneously. Sorry. Then we do spontaneously fermentation. The reason why we do that is that the fermentation normally takes longer, takes much more time than a normal fermentation.
And why is that?
Commercial yeast, because the reason why is that the content of the yeasts are much less. So you only work with the yeast which comes from the vineyard, and if you had commercial yeast, the content of the yeast is much higher, and so they have more power, and that means that they ferment the must much quicker. So our wines normally ferment. It's also depending, but at least 2 months, and sometimes, especially the Smaragd category wines, sometimes they ferment until March or longer. And what we found out is with that long fermentation that the wines become a little bit more stable. Yeah, so they just, you know, they keep themselves stable without any sulfur, because the wines stay longer in a cloudy way, or like in a cloudy situation.
But you leave them in stainless steel, so the fermentation is always in stainless steel?
For the single vineyard, yes, we ferment them in the stainless steel tanks, because that's actually the cleanest isolation you can get. So we ferment them in stainless steel to get the most possible actually single vineyard taste out of the grapes, to be honest, because wood is a little bit effective or influencing, and we only use wood for our flagship wine, the Privat. Because in this case the vineyard soil is not the most important thing. So in this case the taste of the wine itself is more important, and that this is why we ferment and keep that in a wood barrel or in wood barrels, just to get a little bit more oxygen into the wine and let it mature a little faster.
But for the single vineyard wines, so they only stay in stainless steel and never got into these bigger barrels?
No, we actually let it ferment in stainless steel and keep it later on also in stainless steel to get the most possible single vineyard extract out of it.
But also with the fine lees together, right?
Yes, correct. What we also do is that because the fermentation takes much longer, we have it on the full lees also for a longer time. Yeah, let's say for example, if the wine ferments until February, it's of course on the full lees until February, and if the fermentation is done, then normally we keep it unsulfured for another month, just to keep the wine cloudy, because if you add sulfur, then the wine starts to get stable and it starts to get clean from the top on. And this is actually what we don't want to have at the beginning, only at the beginning, because the longer the wine is the longer the wine is clouded, the more stable itself is. And later on, the yeast actually keeps the wine also stable, so you don't actually need much sulfur then, as long as the wine is clouded. If the wine gets clean, then we need to add sulfur a little bit, correct?
But that's only before bottling, I suggest, right?
Yes, correct. We if we bottle, we do before bottling we filter the wines. Yeah.
And do you do fining as well?
We do a little fining but only heat stabilization. That's the only fining we do, especially for Grüner Veltliner, because Grüner Veltliner has got a lot of proteins. And if we wouldn't do that, we would have problems with customers getting the wines cloudy in the bottle later on. And that is what we try to prevent. But that's actually the only fining we do. And on Riesling, we don't do any finings, because Riesling has got less proteins from nature on. But on
so
Grüner,
these are also vegan wines, I suggest, right?
It's vegan, you're correct. Yeah. Our wines are vegan. Is that a big issue in the restaurants, vegan wines or not?
I mean, for me not, but you know, there are always some guests who ask these questions.
No, but we see, especially in the vineyard treatments, that the biological way is getting more and more important.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, we actually switched our vineyard treatments a lot. We switched it nearly completely, and we are not at the moment. We are not biological certified, but we pretty much produce biological.
But you are also sustainably certified, right? It's a sustainable Austria, I guess.
Yes, correct.
So what is maybe the difference between organic and sustainable Austria? So how could you maybe describe what you are using on a daily basis? What would be different from an organic one?
The sustainable certification is less restrictive, more or less. So you have more options if like, let's say if the weather is changing in the summer times or something, you have a little bit more options in the sustainable way.
But you also planted cover crops, right? So like clover and buckwheat and this kind of stuff.
Yes, we work a lot with that.
And what does it give to the final quality, maybe, or how does it help the wine to grow?
What we did is that we stopped completely using commercial fertilizers, and especially in a very hot season, we need to get we try to bring more humus into the soil, or to produce, or we try to let the soil produce more humus. And this is why we started now to plant cover crops to get more humus. And what we also did now for 2 to 3 years now is that we produced our own fertilizer, which is a mixture of all the rest from the press, stalks and the grapes, mixed with horse shit actually, and straw. So we produce our own compost now, and this is now how we fertilize our vineyards. And this is probably definitely the more common way now.
But how does it maybe differ from the biodynamic ones, for example, the 500?
If it differ the quality, I cannot answer that question. But the biodynamic way is a little bit more. They also work more with all the moon phase, and it's just a different meaning of making wine. I mean, also definitely some of maybe all of the biodynamic colleagues are using compost. I'm pretty sure about that. Yeah.
And do you have maybe the intention to go more towards organic or biodynamic?
It looks like, yeah, it is actually, well, like it's a plan, or not a plan, but what we see is that you cannot, or what I think you cannot switch, like if you would be a very commercial and a very conservative producer, you cannot switch your whole vineyard treatments from one day to another, and then you do biodynamic. So it's actually a process which takes time, probably 5, 6, 7 years, maybe longer, to get more and more into that situation, into that physically meaning of how biodynamic or biological winemaking is done.
Okay, so maybe if we already talked a lot about these wines, let me grab some bottles. I come back right away. Okay.
Yeah.
I call you back. Yeah, so I'm back with the wines. I have 4 beautiful wines, as I mentioned, 2 Grüner Veltliners and 2 Rieslings in front of me. And if you could just maybe tell about the Ried Zanz 2019 Grüner Veltliner Federspiel. I try with that.
Yeah, so one of our most important Federspiel wines. And as I mentioned before, the Ried Zanz is the most western vineyard from all our vineyards, which is west and north facing. Yeah, and in this case we have a soil mixed from Löss and Köhlagneis. So this is actually very, in my opinion, a very mineral driven wine. The wine itself is actually coming from our second oldest wines. The nose gives you a very big complexity. Yeah. Sometimes I get some yellowish flavors, like from pears or like from yellow apples. Yeah. But then if you taste them, you get long, not very full-bodied. It's sometimes even a little bit silent. Yeah. And in the aftertaste, you get a little bit more phenolic and mineralic influence.
Yeah, so I could really confirm these yellow flavors. The wine is a little bit cold maybe, but for me it's really this citrusy characters come through, and really this Lisbon lemon or this kind of yellow flavors, but also some underlying sweetness. So it's not really that refreshing, really linear, but
So also in that case, I think you see it very good that this very ripe flavors, or like these yellowish flavors, they probably come from the soil, from the less part of this specific soil, and the aftertaste, or like the on the tongue, then you get all the mineralic flavors, which is coming from the Köhlagneis.
And also what I get is some like minty notes, or some tree leaves, or this kind of herby character as well. So really interesting. Yeah. And this is what I like in a white wine, because it's still refreshing but has some weight to it in the mid palate. So I think it's really hard to achieve, and it has like a pulsing acidity. So it's really like lingers. It dances. It has its up and downs, and not just attacks your mouth and then it's over.
And you drink it, and then the phenolics keeps the wine alive. What I think.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
On the side of the tongue.
True. And really a little bit squeeze your taste buds, I think.
Yeah.
But then let it go. So and a little bit of these zesty flavors, but then also I think these citrusy flavors just getting riper and riper. So more in this orangey, tangerine like. So, but I can feel this rocky and stony element to it as well. So.
And in this case, probably we have normally 3 different types of our Federspiel wines. The first one is called Grüner Federspiel Rossatz, our base wine, which is coming from a little lower altitude sites. And then we have a singing vineyard, like a Grüner Federspiel coming from the Ried Steiger. That's a singing vineyard coming from the eastern part of our village, which is more influenced by the Danube, especially loam and gravel. And this, in this case, or this one especially, is more that aromatic wine. They're more, more full body, more mouth-watering wine, and this one is a little bit more the silent one of our Federspiel. So we have a good mix of a very strong, a very powerful, very creamy wine, and the Zanz. This one is a little bit more the silent one, the mineralic raven one, the wine which needs a little bit more attention, to be honest.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And in terms of vintage, how was the 2019 one?
19 was a very good vintage in terms of quality and quantity. So 2019, at the beginning, or like especially in the summer season, June, July, August, we struggled also with water. So it was a very dry summer. But right before harvest, about 2 to 3 weeks before harvest, we got a lot of rain. And that was good, because then the roots, they just they filled themselves up with water, and we had enough space until harvest appeared. Because sometimes, especially before harvest, or like if you have a very dry situation, like 2 to 3 weeks before harvest, sometimes we have the problem that the sugar level in the berries increases like enormously. That it goes up. That means that you have about 3 to 4 days time for picking all your Federspiel wines, and later on it's just Smaragd quality. That's what I meant between, what as you said, or as you asked, how long is the difference between the picking date of Federspiel and Smaragd? It depends on the vintage normally, but in a perfect vintage, if that would ever come or not, then it's about 10 to 14 days difference.
And in terms of these single vineyards, so you mentioned this is the westernmost, right?
Yeah.
If you could tell from the grape itself when to pick it in terms of timing. So when you go to the eastern part and then you maybe try the grape and okay, it's ready. And then you maybe go to western side, okay, it's not ready yet. So
we actually see it already now in the vineyards, because the shoots of the vineyards now, they are already longer in the eastern vineyards, like Steiger, than in the western vineyards in this one, like Zanz. Yeah? And that's normally a thing that these wines they never they get never compared to each other. So if the shoots of this type of soil is long at this time already, then I also know that the picking date in this vineyard will be earlier.
Yeah.
Because that's a time difference of about, in the Federspiel wine, of about 4 to 5 days, which these wines are now in front already. So that also probably means that the blooming will start a few days later on in this vineyards. And that's all some factors you just get used to it as a winemaker. So of course we use the refractometer to be 100% sure when to pick, but normally you get a feeling for that, more or less.
And but then when you pick, you already aim that okay, I want to Federspiel or out of it, or I want to Smaragd out of it, or does it come afterwards?
Normally we know it from the beginning on. Yeah, because I have my whole portfolio, and I'm not a fan of changing the portfolio every vintage. I'd like to have a strict, or not a strict, but a continuously following portfolio. And so we know, like from the Zanzl, we always just produce Federspiel because it's quite successful. Yeah. And we don't have that big amount of hectares in this vineyard. So in this case, it wouldn't make sense for us as a winemaker to see it from the business side, to have a Federspiel and the Smaragd, because then the quantity of each wine would just be down. And that means that it makes it easier or like harder to sell, because then you have your customers and you get more problems with that. So like for the single vineyard Steiger, which is one of our biggest single vineyards, we produce of course then Federspiel and Smaragd quality, because it's allowable in terms of quantity.
Or how big is your vineyard area overall?
We produce about 10 hectares of vineyards.
Okay.
We are only focusing mainly on Grüner, Veltliner and Riesling. We have a little piece of Muscatella, but it's just about 5% of the whole production. And of course, Grüner Veltliner is the main goal, with about 70%.
Okay.
And we have 25 Riesling and 5% Muscatella. But to be honest, the part of Riesling in my winery is getting higher and higher, because of the climate change. Because water is more and more a thing to worry about. To be honest, even now we didn't have rain for about, I can't even remember when it rained for the last time.
Same here in Germany.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So that's gonna be a big issue. Water thing. Yeah.
Okay, so let's maybe try the other wine. I think that was the favorite, if I may say so. The Grüner Veltliner Smaragd Ried Kreuzberg. This is
which vintage?
2018.
18, yeah.
So if you could just tell a little bit about this.
Yeah,
terroir and the vintage.
or it is east facing, west facing, and north facing because of the curve of the Danube. But in this case, it's east facing.
Mm-hmm.
And east facing means that it gets more morning sun and less afternoon sun. And morning sun is in terms of harvest quite good, because normally because of the Danube we have a lot of foggy nights.
Mm-hmm.
Foggy nights means humus or wet berries in the morning, and these berries need to dry out first, because otherwise you would wash your berries with water and you would get the whole water into the press and the dust finally. And so we need to wait until the berries are dry. And if it's east facing, it's just drier faster because the sun
hits them right away. Yeah.
And so we are in the situation that we can harvest this single vineyard very early, and so we can bring it into the cellar very cool, in a very cool way.
Talk a little about Kreuzberg and how does it differ from the other ones?
Yeah, so the Kreuzberg itself is facing east, west, and north because of the curve of the Danube, and our vineyards stand more on the eastern facing part, which means that the wines get a little bit more morning sun, and less afternoon sun. So, and morning sun is normally, in terms of picking time, pretty good, because the wines, the berries, they dry out a little quicker because of our foggy nights because of the Danube River.
Okay.
Yeah. And the vineyard itself is, as we mentioned before, M5 Bolite, and it's a very meager soil, but not that meager not to plant Grüner out of it. You know what I mean? Vines get enough water to produce high quality grapes, but we also have some Riesling there. So it's actually a single vineyard which can do both Grüner Veltliner and Riesling.
And in terms of altitude?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think it must be something between 250 and 350, something like 250 meters up to 350 meters above sea level. It's also a mountain, mountain where the Black Forest is behind it, and so you have some lower altitude vineyards, of course, and higher ones. But the average is probably something in about 300 meters. It's not that very high. So that the highest vineyard in the Wachau Valley, situated in the Spitzer Graben, I think these vineyards, they are about 550 or 600 meters above sea level, which is the absolute maximum what we have here in the Wachau Valley. But 300 meters is also not so bad.
But the Danube is already on 200 meters, right?
A little less, correct. It must be a little less because the village is on 200 meters.
Okay. So hopefully less than,
yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the Danube must be about 150, 160, 170, something like that. But I'm not 100% sure about that, so please don't.
Don't quote me on that, yeah. But it's, this is really a complex nose, and this is what I like about the Smaragd wine, because it's really this ripe, pomaceous fruits like pear, but also this blossom, this flowery notes. So this is really combined together, this elderflowery and maybe also this almost green tea aroma. So it's such a complex nose. I love it.
Oh, that's actually a very, very cool singing wine. That's correct. Yeah, what we like it a lot. It's actually one of our, of course, most important wines, especially for even the restaurants and also for the private customers. A lot of people like this wine.
Wow, and really it's just so much extract, and so the viscosity is so low you can almost bite this wine. It's almost like a soup, man.
Yeah. 2018 actually was the earliest vintage we ever had in our history. That's actually coming from the very hot spring what we had. So actually we didn't have spring in 2018. We had winter, and then the spring was so hot that it could be a summer. So winter ended, and more or less that hot spring came, and then we had the earliest blossom we ever had, which was appearing in the end of May, and normally we have it in about middle of June. So we were like 10 to 20 days earlier than in a full year. And then we started picking on the 5th of September for the base wines, for the Federspiel base wines. And normally we start, as I mentioned, at the end of September. So that was a tough vintage. Yeah, it was the quickest ever, and yeah, it was powerful.
But actually, in this wine, I could feel more this inorganic or so-called minerality in this wine.
Yeah.
It's just really like little rocks floating around in my mouth. It's really dominated by that, but also I think what is really a good measure of quality is that the finish is more fruity than acidic. So it's really built up.
Yeah. So that probably comes because of the hot summer. Normally, if you have that hot days, you lose your acid, and Grüner Veltliner struggles with a little acid. It's actually quite funny because my parents, my father and my grandfather, they always struggled to have too much acid. So they actually needed to decrease the acid in the wine because their wines weren't just drinkable. And we have now the complete opposite. So we actually need to look for the harvest date, not too late, because the later you pick, the less acid you have, because the berry just produces sugar, and the riper they become, the more acid they lose. So actually now we look for we look closer on the acid than on the sugar. To be honest, when we decide to pick, this is how the time changed. To be honest, yeah.
And how do you think it will change?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not going back to my father's system. So yeah, that's actually also what we think nowadays, that we at the moment, to be honest, we are focusing more on planting Riesling, because Riesling just handles the situation with the acid better than the Grüner, and then we try to keep the Grüners on the little lower altitude sides than the higher ones, just to keep the acid. And yeah, it's gonna be tough, but probably climate change is a big thing, which probably we don't, or what we need to get used to it.
Yeah, true. We don't have a choice, unfortunately.
Yeah, doesn't look like it at the moment, though.
Yeah. And what about malolactic fermentation?
Sometimes it happens, sometimes not.
So you don't encourage it, or?
We don't look that much for the mellow. Sometimes it happens because of the spontaneous fermentation. Our fermentation time is so much longer. Then sometimes we have a side malolactic fermentation next to the spontaneous fermentation, but then it makes the wine a little rounder. But we don't. But not. Sometimes you get a little buttery taste out of a malolactic fermentation, but this is normally coming because of too early sulfuring. You know what I mean? Because then the SO2 takes place, and that mixture that produces the chemical reactions with the components of the mellow, and then you get that buttery taste. And this is why we keep the wines unsulfured for a long time after fermentation afterwards, to not get these tastes, and then it gets back to the fruity taste of the white wines. Yeah, but sometimes, of course, we cannot handle it for 100%, so we let it happen, which is a little bit more the biological way, more or less. Yeah.
And in terms of this wine, do you remember if it went through or partially?
In this case, there was not a mellow. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so maybe let's go back to 2019. Riesling Federspiel Ried Kirnberg.
2018 vintage was later. Later means we had quite a normal harvest date at like we started picking at the end of September. Yeah, and we finished at the, I think, third week of October. And this Riesling is actually this single vineyard site. Kirnberg is our most important single vineyard site for the Riesling. This is mainly Paragneiss, yeah, which is coming from a volcanic situation in the past. And what we get here is a lot of also a little bit compared to the Zanz, so you get a lot of fruity taste in the nose.
Yeah, true. A lot of apricot, what I get actually, and almost this mango, almost this exotic tropical side.
This is actually very typical for the single vineyard Kirnberg. But then in the taste on the tongue, you get not a very broad feeling. You don't get a overwhelming flavor. It's very silent. It keeps or like it stays straightforward, yeah, with mineralic, acid-driven aftertaste with a good phenolic bone. What I think. Yeah. The phenolics they keep the wines alive. They keep the wine drinkable for a longer time. Even for the Federspiel category, I can suggest a standing time for 5 to 6 years easily. Like we had in February, when the restaurants were still when the restaurants were still open and life was normal. Yeah. We tasted at 2013 Riesling Federspiel from the single Kirnberg. It was still perfect. So sometimes the people only sometimes the people think that the wines from the Wachau Valley only can age when it's Smaragd standing on the label, but that's not true. So even the Federspiel wines can age very easily.
I also experienced it, if I may say, or refer to Nikolaihof. I think they really produce age-worthy wines, perfect too.
Yeah, Niki is like a freak when you think about him, because he keeps it in the tank or in the barrel and then he just bottles it when he thinks that's now it's good.
Yeah, it's ready. Yeah, or if he doesn't have enough space in the cellar.
Oh yeah,
but I really get this, not phenolic bitterness, but really this phenolic taste. In the other wine, the Smaragd, the Grüner Veltliner, it almost turned this, this pear peel kind of character on this chest. I don't get in this wine so intensively, but also this citrusy acidity, I get. Yep. So not too inorganic, I would say, and
but we
slightly tingly.
2019, of course, has got now a disadvantage to the 18 vintage because it's less developed. But this wine we actually just bottled before the Corona crisis. So this wine was bottled in the middle of March. It was actually bottled in the week of the shutdown. So we had quite a lot of time at this time.
Memorable.
So we bottled it to this. So this is about in bottle for now 6 weeks, 7 weeks. It's very early. So leave it and drink it later on. Especially Riesling needs more time in the bottle to develop, what we see. So if you like bottle a Grüner, like 2-3 weeks later on, it's on point.
Yeah.
And Riesling is the diva of the wine. That's what people say. So if you bottle it, it gets a shock, and then it takes months or 2 months to open up again and shows its best.
Yes. And also, this wine already has long aftertaste, even though it's a Federspiel. So at first, to be honest, I got some like kind of limoncello kind of characters, but then it's got complex, and also slowly this blossom honey characters coming through, and the acidity stays in the on the side of my mouth. So really complex wines.
Do you think, or what do you think, is the Riesling? It's got the Riesling a little riper taste, or the Kreuzberg? What you tasted before?
I think the Kreuzberg had a riper taste, but maybe with time this Riesling would also show some more riper taste.
Yeah.
But maybe it's the vintage and the bottle aging. But I think the Riesling has more acidity, right? Yeah. So maybe this sensation also helps, to feel more fresh flavors.
Normally, our wines in the Grüner Veltliner style, as they switch between 5 and 6 grams per liter acid, and the Riesling normally have something between 6 and 7 grams per liter. So normally, the Rieslings have got a more or less, in general, say a gram per liter more acid than the Grüners have. But normally also the Riesling they have less alcohol because they ripen later and slowly up.
Yeah. So maybe let's try the oldest one, 2017 Riesling Wachau Reserve. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about this label, because it's an artwork on itself.
Yeah, correct. So in this case, I've got a lot to tell, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay.
Before I start with the label, I actually need to start with the winemaking itself. So it's called Riesling Reserve 2017. So the first question is probably, why is it not a Smaragd?
Yeah.
And the reason is because it's not 100% dry. It's semi-sweet or half dry. It's got about 10 grams per liter sugar.
Okay.
The wine law for Smaragd says that it must be dry, and dry means 9 grams per liter residual sugar. So in this case, because it fermented spontaneously, and all of a sudden it didn't ferment through, so the fermentation stopped at about 11 grams per liter. But luckily, the acid stayed very high, so we have almost 8 grams per liter acid. So we have a good balance between sugar and acid. When I taste the wine, I actually, if you get it blind, you wouldn't say that it's actually half dry, or actually it doesn't taste that sweet in my eyes.
Yeah, I also couldn't notice that actually, but it stays there half trocken.
Yeah.
And yesterday we tried, and that was the favorite wine of my girlfriend actually, because she also likes this, also this Gewürztraminer side, or maybe Pinot Gris fermented in barrel.
Yeah.
But it's really like 2 layers. I remember, like a little bit of sugar gives some weight, but the acidity keeps it fresh.
And the most important thing on sugar is that it has got acid to stabilize it.
Yeah.
This is also why Riesling is very famous for its sweet wines. Because if you compare it to Grüner, Grüner is not that perfect variety for a sweet wine, because it doesn't have that acid as a component to the sugar. And to go back to this wine, so this wine didn't ferment through completely, so it kept its sugar. So I was not allowed to put Smaragd on the label. But we pretty much like the flavor, and so we decided to bottle it on its own as it was. after the fermentation. And the label itself is actually the label we had before the label which we have now.
Mm-hmm.
And the label shows actually the view from our garden. If you look at it a little closer, then you see on the left-hand side some vineyards, yeah, and then you see the castle of Dürnstein on the left corner.
Mm-hmm.
You see the church of Dürnstein, the blue church.
Mm-hmm.
And on the right side, you see the monastery of Göttweig,
Mm-hmm.
which is in the Kremstal. So actually, you see all these very famous things, especially on the castle of Dürnstein. This is where Richard Lionheart was kept in the 14th century.
Okay.
So there was is it called crusader?
Yeah. Crusader. Yeah.
And they kept him there as a prisoner. And then there's the history of singer Blondel who sang a song, and King Richard Lionheart was the only guy who could repeat this song. And then he repeated that song, and then the people knew exactly, okay, he's kept in this prison, in this castle, and then they came and took him back, fought him back. Yeah.
Wow.
And this is the history of the castle of Dürnstein.
For him, because he could have stayed and drink this beautiful wines probably at that time too.
100% sure if in the 14th century if he was about drinking wine in castle. Yeah.
But actually from the taste I get this kind of acidic tropical fruit, so like maracuja and this kind of tangerine.
Yeah. And this one actually went through malolactic.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so you have a different flavors,
Yeah.
little riper flavors. So and in the taste, like if you compare it to the Riesling, it's completely different.
True.
It's more a little rounder body, more full body.
No.
You've got a little less acidity because of the mellow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, we actually liked it, and we thought that it's gonna fit to our portfolio very good as a side probably.
Yeah.
And this is why also then we thought to put it on a different label. This actually was also the idea of my girlfriend.
Good idea for sure.
She liked the old labels, and in our tasting room we have a history of all our labels.
Mm-hmm.
And when she came to the winery, she saw that bottle and saw, oh, that was a, well, what kind of label was that? And then I explained to her, okay, you see the Castle of Dürnstein, all that bum, 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 bum.
Uh-huh.
And we had this wine, and so this wine is also very special because we didn't produce it in 2018 and 2019, so it's just 2017, and yeah, we'll see if we have a next wine which doesn't go through fermentation 100% through, then maybe we continue a second one. But yeah.
And you could call it reserve because it's more than 13% alcohol, or?
No, that's in the Wachau Valley. There's not a 100% restriction for reserve.
Okay.
But reserve means, of course, it's more full-bodied.
Okay.
Because I think on the label 13.5.
13.5, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a little bit, of course, more on the full body side,
Mm-hmm.
more on the stronger character, and less on the Federspiel character, probably. Which is, it's not a wine probably to have it quickly on the terrace on a summer day or something. It's more a wine who needs probably strong food. We had it on Tuesday. We had it with vegetable curry.
Okay.
It was very well.
Yeah. Yesterday I actually had it with the chicken curry.
Yeah, curry, yeah.
That was perfect, actually.
Especially if the curry is a little spicy.
True.
Then
yeah, with a lot of curcuma.
This wine fits perfectly.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really good food wine, actually. And just good to have around in the restaurant because it still has this mouth-watering effect, but you don't have this overwhelming bout of acidity. So it's really well balanced. I think it's really just good to have around. Maybe I Hopefully we have it in the restaurant later when it opens.
We could finish there.
Yeah, and also maybe if you could, because I'm sorry, but I couldn't ask or I haven't asked about your present or current label. If you could just tell a little bit about this fish.
Yeah, on the fish, what you see on the label is called a Danube salmon. Yeah, and this fish belongs to the families of the trout. Yeah. But it becomes much bigger than a normal trout. It becomes about 1 meter and 20 to 50 centimeters, so it becomes quite big. And this fish actually swims mostly in the Danube, but there's also some side rivers in Austria where this fish is having its life. And we actually, or my father farms this fish. So we have next to our house a little fish farm where we farm this fish. And the special thing is that we don't farm it for local restaurants or for restaurants in Austria. So actually we farm it to bring the fish back to nature. So because the fish is on the red list in actually whole Europe, mainly because of overfishing and the ships and power stations, of course. And so we farm this fish until they have a size of about 30-40 centimeters, which is around after 3 to 4 years. So we keep the fish 3 to 4 years in little casks filled up with ground level water from the Danube. And when the fish is big enough, we put them back into the river.
So why did you put it on the label?
Because a lot of people knew us because of that, actually. And the label become quite famous from time to time because of our fish farm, and we still keep it. Yeah, it's not. If you see it, you don't recognize it, or you don't understand the meaning of the fish and the wine. A lot of people ask me, is that wine good for a fish pairing? And I say, yeah, of course, but this is not the reason why we have a fish on the label.
It's not a typical wine label, so I think it's a really good also marketing campaign maybe, or marketing idea as well, because it's also very distinctive. Yeah. And maybe if you could just ask about the recent DAC lows, because we are now recording this on the 14th of May, and from tomorrow on, Wachau also became a DAC region, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah, it was a long process until we got it, but finally Wachau is becoming a DSC label from the 2020 vintage on. So the 2019 vintage will be historical because it's the last vintage without DSC, and 2020 will also be a very historic vintage because of the fucking Corona crisis. and the DSC thing. Yeah, the meaning is it's actually very different to the other DAC restrictions in Austria, because mostly the wineries or the wine regions only have 1 or 2 or 3 varieties, including the DSA system. But our system is much more complex because we needed to fit it into the Steinfeder, Federspiel, and Smaragd categories. And these 3 categories gives or says that it's or these 3 categories stays for all the white wines what we have in the Wachau Valley. So the Steinfeder, Federspiel, and Smaragd category is not allowed for the red wines. No. But the red wine production is just 2 or 3% anyway. So that means we needed to fit or we needed to find a solution to combine both the Federspiel and Smaragd and Steinfeder category and the DSC. And nobody of us, really nobody, wanted to quit the Federspiel, Steinfeder, and Smaragd categories, because these categories are so well known in all over the world. So everybody knows Wachau wines, or if they see Federspiel on the label, and people who know about wine know that it's coming from winery from Wachau Valley. And if you see DAC is a little bit more complex. It can be from everywhere in Austria. So what the people from the people in charge of did was that they took the main 17 white varieties out of the box, took that for a DSC label. But the thing is, from this system on, we are only allowed to put the single vineyards on the labels on a Riesling and the Grüner Veltliner. So, for example, if you have Chardonnay, Smaragd, Ried, blah blah blah, from now on you are not allowed to put the single vineyard on the label. You are allowed to put Smaragd on the label, but not the single vineyard. So there is some. There is some producers who have changings, and in my winery, I don't have to change anything because I have a Gelber Muscatella also in my portfolio, but there's not a single vineyard on the label. It just says Gelber Muscatella. If you have probably, let's say, if I would have probably, to get the people know, a Gelber Muscatella, Federspiel, Ried, Kreuzberg, for instance.
Yeah.
From that time on, 2020, I need to quit or to put the single vineyard name out from the label. So we are focusing actually on Grüner Veltliner and Riesling as single vineyard style, and leave all the non-Grüner Veltliner and Rieslings with the single vineyards behind. You know what I mean?
But then you can also label it like a village wine, and
you are allowed to label it as a village wine, but the village wine is then the biggest area what you are allowed to put on the label. Correct. So that's the solution.
And do you think it's a good direction what Wachau took?
Yes and no. I can understand some haters because we get a lot of haters now because they say it's out of the range of all the other DSC systems. But I even understand the people who were in charge of the Wachau DSC because they needed to fit in our existing labeling into the new DSC system. And what the people didn't want to have is that they have, let's say, a Muscatella Federspiel, and then you need to put Lower Austria on the label because you're not allowed to put Wachau DSC on the label. So what that means, or like this is probably what other peoples have, like in Kamptal, for instance. They have Grüner Veltliner and Riesling, DAC, and if they have, like, for instance, a Chardonnay, then they must put on the label Lower Austria. And that was our point. So now we had like a Chardonnay, Smaragd. A lot of producers have that. Or doesn't matter anything though. Let's put, for instance, Chardonnay, Smaragd. So then Chardonnay, if Chardonnay wouldn't be in the DSC system, then you would have a Chardonnay, Smaragd from Lower Austria, which is not possible. Because then a Kremstal winemaker could have Smaragd. And that was the big problem what we had in our existing system, and nobody wanted to quit the Federspiel, Steinfeder, and Smaragd categories. These categories made history, actually.
So why do you think it was actually important for the Wachau to enter this system?
Probably it was just a process.
Okay.
In terms of the Austrian marketing board, the Austrian wine marketing board. Probably it has got a lot to do with marketing. And therefore I'm not seeing Wachau more Austrian wine marketing itself. That because Austrians wine production is about 1% of international wine producing. So Austria is like a tiny little piece on the label of international wines, and so probably the wine marketing board needs to, focus more on the TC category, and that's the point. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad.
Yeah, true.
I will fit in the system, and for me, it doesn't change anything I mentioned, because I have the only thing what I need to change is to put Wachau DOC on the back label. So I don't have any problems with that solution, to be honest. But but if they would have quit the existing system, I would have a big problem, because there was a marketing master.
True, I think so too. Yeah. The word, or the wine word, is going into the direction of the kind of Burgundian winemaking, a Burgundian style, when it's really site specific, and then you can explain the terroir, the microclimate, the exposure, and so on. And I think Wachau had a really big advantage of that, because they have been, or you have been doing this for years, decades. And I think Wachau was really distinctive in terms of identifying more than 150 separate single vineyards. And I'm really glad that you didn't have to give up this, but that's why I asked you that why do you think Austrians did it, or Wachau did it?
That's actually a very good point. A lot of people compare the Wachau region to the Burgundy region. Even if you see my portfolio, I've got 3 varieties, but the whole portfolio makes out about, I'm not 100% sure now, but it must be about something between 12 and 14 wines or something. And that's just based on single vineyard wines. If I would stick on 3 varieties itself, then my portfolio would be 3 wines. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
It's very comparative to the Burgundy style, because you see, if you see all the famous single vineyards, Romani Conti, or it's actually that they even go further. They don't even put the variety on the label. They just put the single vineyard on the label. It's just it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they even have a step further. So, but that's gonna be a bit too close for a bit too much for us. So that's fine.
And if I could ask maybe some personal questions, because I noticed you're drinking a red wine. So what are you drinking maybe in your free time when you don't drink a local wine?
We actually drink a lot of wines. So before that, I had Grüner Veltliner from my best friend, which is called Georg Frischengruber.
Okay, yeah, I know this.
That is a Grüner Veltliner Smaragd Steiger 2013. But normally during, or like in the evening when we have a wine with our food or something, we never drink our own wines. We just drink the competitors. So we
maybe drink it for pleasure, or you also take sometimes notes maybe, or?
No, actually I never do notes. Of course I compare it to my own wines. If I drink like the Wachau classics. But if we have dinner, then we have dinner, and then there's no time for notes.
True.
But I don't need to have notes. I'm not a sommelier. You need to make the notes, no?
True, right. But I do it with pleasure, so.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I actually like to think that, especially in these days, that a sommelier, I think, should go back to his childhood, and when you touch everything and you want to taste everything, touch into your mouth, and then compare it to other things. And I'm also really grateful that you sent these wines, and it's really interesting to compare even just the notes to other maybe Nikolaihof wines, and just to compare it with other Wachau wineries and what I get from different sites, and also from Federspiel, from Smaragd, and different soil types. So I think it's also very interesting. So I really like to take notes, and your wines
Oh, yeah.
made a good impression on me.
But to finish that, I think I actually have, or I get these questions a lot. What makes it different between the left riverbank and the right riverbank? And to be honest, there's not a big difference between the left and the right bank. It's much more difference between the eastern Wachau part and the western Wachau part. So that's much more influencing because the Danube is a Danube, and that's it. So you know what I mean. It's just a river.
Yeah.
So of course I need to take a bridge to come to the other side, but the climate, the sun doesn't make any change. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And also, I think Nikki, from Nikolaiov, Mrs. As, made a good point that the railway or the train is actually going on the other side, right? Yep. So he said maybe the other side got famous or more famous because all the people from Vienna came via the train, and they stopped there.
The point is that Krems is on the other side of the river, and Krems has got the central station.
Okay,
that's the point. And we don't have on our side, we don't have a bridge for the railway.
Okay.
So that's the only thing, to be honest. Yeah, but we have but we don't have any problems to go to the other side because we have bridges, we have ferries. Lots of the ferries are likely taken by the tourists. They love it, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, even the ferries, they even take cars, so there's not a lot of problems. And even we have some probably 5 to 10 wineries who have vineyards on both sides of the Danube.
Okay.
They drive the tractor on the ferry, go to the other side of the river by ferry, and then they treat their vineyards with a tractor, or doesn't matter, by hand. But they have both, or they have vineyards on both sides. That's mainly coming from family. You know, from like if you marry somebody of the other side, then you get together, and but mainly it's coming from the family side. But the river is a river, and it's not a big. It's actually
defining factor.
So that the people think that the left river bank and the right river bank, they fight to each other, but it's not true. It's not true. No.
It's not Bordeaux, then you can really distinguish the two sides.
Yeah, but it's the same like in Bordeaux, correct? It's you know that it's a left river bank and the right river bank, but that one river bank has got a little more percentage on Merlot. The other ones have more on Cab, but you never hear that they fight each other. So I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, so Joe, thank you very much for this evening. I think the conversation went for almost 2 hours, so it was a pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time, and beautiful wines. Hope to visit you.
Hopefully we see each other soon in personal, not on the TV or not on the computer.
Hopefully. Yeah. So thank you very much, Joe, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening, sir.
Nice evening. Ciao, yeah.
Ciao.